Picture your brain as a city, not just any city, the busiest, most electric metropolis on Earth, with billions of wires firing signals in every direction at once, 24 hours a day, never sleeping, never stopping. Every thought you've ever had, every memory you've ever kept, every decision you've ever made. All of it is the product of a perfectly orchestrated electrical storm happening inside that neural metropolis, right now, as you watch this. Now imagine those wires start to fray. The signals slow down. They get blurry, confused. The city starts losing efficiency, block by block. That is exactly what happens when your nervous system is starved of one of the most fundamental building blocks it needs to function, a family of long-chain fatty acids called omega-3. Today we're going deep into one of the most fascinating topics in modern neuroscience. What actually happens to your brain, your synaptic connections, and your ability to focus when you start feeding it omega-3 consistently? Not once, not as a trend, daily. Everything you're about to hear is backed by decades of research, clinical trials, and the work of some of the most respected neuroscientists alive. But first, a question. How many times have you felt like your mind just wasn't responding? That afternoon fog that rolls in out of nowhere. That struggle to hold on to new information. That feeling like your focus shatters the second anything distracts you. If you felt that, what you're about to learn might change the way you see your own mind permanently. Let's start with the basics. Omega-3 isn't one single compound. It's a family of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And inside that family, three members matter most for brain function: DHA, EPA, and DHA. Of these three, DHA is the star of the show when it comes to neurology. Roughly 60% of the solid mass of the human brain is made of lipids, fats. And of all those lipids, DHA makes up about 40% of them. Let that sink in. Almost a quarter of the physical structure of your brain depends directly on this one fatty acid. That's not an exaggeration. That's anatomy. So here's the question that actually matters. What happens at the cellular level when you consume omega-3 regularly? To answer that, we need to talk about neuron membranes. Every single neuron in your brain is wrapped in a lipid membrane. And that membrane isn't just a wall. It's a living, dynamic structure. It decides what enters the cell and what leaves. It handles communication with neighboring neurons. And it largely determines how fast electrical signals travel through your brain. When that membrane has enough DHA, it becomes more fluid, more permeable in exactly the right way, more efficient. The protein receptors sitting inside that membrane work better. And the synapse, that split-second moment when one neuron hands information to the next, becomes faster and more precise. Let's go deeper on synapses, because they are the actual heart of everything we call the mind. A synapse is the microscopic gap between two neurons. Inside that gap, one neuron releases chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, which travel across and trigger a new electrical signal in the next neuron. Omega-3, and DHA specifically, directly shapes how efficient this process is in three distinct ways. First, it increases the density of serotonin and dopamine receptors on neuron membranes, meaning your brain can actually use these neurotransmitters more effectively for mood, motivation, and reward. Second, it fuels the production of phosphatidylserine, a phospholipid essential for synaptic transmission and for keeping your neuroplasticity intact. Third, it regulates the ion channels that control sodium, potassium, and calcium flow across the membrane, the exact elements your brain needs to fire signals with speed and accuracy. More than 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates said food should be our medicine. He had no idea what a fatty acid even was. But his instinct about the link between nutrition and the mind turned out to be almost eerily correct. Now let's talk about neuroplasticity, possibly the single most hopeful concept in all of modern neuroscience. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed, rigid. Whatever wiring you had by the end of adolescence was what you were stuck with for life. That idea is completely dead now. We know today that the human brain has an extraordinary ability to reorganize itself, to build new connections, strengthen the ones it uses, and quietly delete the ones it doesn't. We call this neuroplasticity, and omega-3 is one of the most powerful catalysts we know of for triggering it. The mechanism behind this involves a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of it as fertilizer for your neurons. It stimulates the growth of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, the region responsible for forming memories, and it strengthens the synapses you already have. Study after study has shown that regular omega-3 intake significantly raises BDNF levels. And when that happens, your brain literally grows in complexity. The networks get denser, more interconnected, more capable. If the name Santiago Ramón y Cajal just crossed your mind, the Spanish scientist who won the Nobel Prize in 1906 for proving the nervous system is made of individual cells, you're thinking of exactly the right person. Cajal was the first to imagine the brain as a dynamic network of independent units talking to each other. Modern neuroscience has proven him right in ways he could never have predicted. If this is already changing how you think about your own biology, hit subscribe. This channel exists to turn complex science into something you can actually use to make smarter decisions about your health and your mind. Now let's talk about focus, because this is where omega-3 shows some of its most noticeable effects, sometimes within weeks. Sustained attention isn't just willpower or discipline. It's a neurobiological process that depends on multiple brain regions working in sync. Most importantly, the prefrontal cortex. This is the command center of your brain. Planning, decision-making, filtering out distractions, holding your focus, it all runs through here. And the prefrontal cortex is extraordinarily dependent on DHA to function properly. When omega-3 levels run low, activity in this region becomes erratic. Attention networks fall out of sync. The result is that state everyone knows and nobody likes, brain fog, trying to think through frosted glass. But when omega-3 intake is adequate, brain scans show something completely different. More coherent activation in the prefrontal regions, stronger functional connectivity between brain areas, and lower cortisol, the stress hormone that literally damages neurons when it stays elevated for too long. There's a landmark study worth mentioning here. Researchers at Oxford ran a trial with school-age children who had attention and learning difficulties. After supplementing them with specific doses of DHA for several months, they found statistically significant improvements in reading ability, information processing, and attention-related behavior. The results were strong enough to spark an entire new field of research into the link between lipid nutrition and brain development. And this isn't just about children. The adult brain, as we said, stays plastic for life, and omega-3 stays relevant at every single age. Now let's talk about something most people have never even heard of, neuroinflammation. And this one matters more than almost anything else on this list for your long-term cognitive health. Even protected by your skull and the blood-brain barrier, your brain is not immune to inflammation. In fact, chronic low-grade neuroinflammation is one of the most heavily studied risk factors for age-related cognitive decline, for conditions like Alzheimer's, and for mood disorders like major depression. This is where omega-3, specifically EPA, plays a massive anti-inflammatory role. EPA blocks the production of pro-inflammatory compounds and boosts the synthesis of resolvins and protectins, molecules your own body uses to shut down inflammation and protect neural tissue from oxidative damage. In simple terms, EPA acts like a firefighter inside your brain, putting out inflammatory fires before they destroy the tissue you need to think, remember, and concentrate. One study published in a translational psychiatry journal found that people with low blood omega-3 levels had elevated inflammatory markers in their cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that bathes the brain, and that inflammation directly correlated with worse performance on cognitive tests. When omega-3 levels were raised through supplementation or diet, those inflammatory markers dropped, and cognitive performance improved right along with them. So, how much omega-3 do you actually need, and where do you get it? The richest food sources of EPA and DHA are cold, deep-water fish, wild salmon, sardines, herring, mackerel, tuna. These fish accumulate DHA and EPA because they feed on microalgae that produce it naturally. In fact, if you trace the chain back to its true origin, those single-celled microalgae are the real primary source of marine omega-3, which is exactly why algae-based supplements are a completely valid option for anyone eating vegetarian or vegan. Walnuts, flaxseed, and chia oil contain ALA, which your body can convert into EPA and DHA, but that conversion is metabolically inefficient in humans. Only a small percentage of the ALA you eat, actually becomes the active forms your brain uses. As for amounts, major international health organizations generally recommend somewhere between 250 and 500 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA per day for healthy adults. Some clinical protocols targeting cognitive health or inflammation work with higher doses, but always under professional supervision. Here's something I personally find fascinating from an evolutionary biology angle. The human brain went through an extraordinary, accelerated growth spurt during the Pleistocene, the period stretching from roughly 2.5 million years ago to about 11,000 years ago. Several paleoanthropologists, including researcher Michael Crawford from the Institute of Brain Chemistry in London, have argued that this accelerated brain growth was only possible because our ancestors had access to DHA-rich food sources, mainly seafood, fish, and other aquatic life, consumed by populations living along coastlines and riverbanks. In other words, the fatty acid we now think of as a nutritional supplement may have been one of the biological triggers behind the rise of human intelligence itself. That's not a small detail. That's a completely different way of understanding our own evolutionary story. If that connection between evolution, neuroscience, and nutrition blows your mind as much as it blows ours, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every share puts real science in front of someone who might never have found it otherwise. Let's come back to the present and talk about something very concrete: the effects of omega-3 on mental health and emotional balance, an area where research has advanced dramatically over the past 20 years. The link between mood and brain chemistry runs far deeper than most people realize. Neurotransmitters that regulate mood, motivation, and emotional response, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all depend on healthy neuron membranes to function properly. And we already know those membranes need DHA. But there's more. EPA has direct effects on emotional regulation circuits that go beyond its structural role. Research across multiple countries has shown that EPA can act as a mood modulator with effectiveness comparable, in some contexts, to certain conventional antidepressant medications, particularly in cases of depression linked to elevated inflammation. Psychiatrist Andrew Stoll of Harvard University was one of the pioneers exploring this therapeutic connection, and his work opened a door that thousands of researchers are still walking through today. This isn't about replacing conventional medical treatment when it's needed. It's about understanding that nutrition and pharmacology aren't separate universes. They're complementary dimensions of total brain health. We also need to talk about brain aging, because as life expectancy keeps climbing, keeping your mind sharp for longer has become a collective priority. Age-related cognitive decline isn't just the inevitable result of time passing. To a large extent, it's the accumulated result of decades of chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, gradual loss of synaptic plasticity, and slowly degrading neuron membranes. Every one of those processes can be slowed down with the right nutritional interventions, and omega-3 sits near the top of that list. A large-scale, long-term study conducted in France, known as the Three-City Study, followed thousands of older adults for years. Researchers found that those with higher habitual intake of fish and omega-3 fatty acids had significantly lower rates of cognitive decline and a lower likelihood of developing dementia compared to lower consumption groups. That association held up even after controlling for education, socioeconomic status, physical activity, and other confounding factors. That tells us something powerful. What you put on your plate today shapes the clarity of your mind decades from now. Before we wrap up, there's one thing that almost never gets mentioned in conversations about omega-3 and brain function: quality and sourcing. Not all supplements on the market are equal. The actual concentration of EPA and DHA varies wildly between brands. Oxidation, which happens when a product isn't processed or stored correctly, doesn't just reduce effectiveness. It can create compounds that are genuinely harmful. Always look for supplements that have gone through independent purity testing, that clearly list their EPA and DHA content per dose, and that come from environmentally responsible sources. The most direct alternative is still real food. 2 to 3 servings of quality fatty fish per week give most healthy adults everything they need. Combine that with a diet rich in dark leafy greens, walnuts, seeds, and olive oil, and you create a metabolic environment that amplifies omega-3's neuroprotective effects even further. We've covered a lot of ground today, From the molecular structure of neuron membranes to the evolutionary history of human intelligence, from the mechanics of synaptic transmission to the clinical effects on depression and cognitive decline. And everything we just walked through leads to one conclusion that's both simple and profound. What you feed your body literally becomes what you're capable of thinking. Your brain isn't some organ floating separately from your biology. It's your body's most sophisticated product, its most complex expression. And like anything built to that level of complexity, it needs the right raw materials to stay sharp, functional, and brilliant for as long as possible. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of curious mind this channel was built for. Drop a comment. What part of this surprised you the most? What question does this leave you with? That's what keeps this channel alive. And if you haven't liked this video yet, now's the moment. Every single interaction tells the algorithm this is worth putting in front of more people like you. Subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.